I would like to introduce you to Reid Lyon. And thank you to Reid for doing this. He's retired in Florida and he's come out of retirement to share what he knows with us. And it's very exciting. And we have a full house. I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but the community has turned out and is very interested in what you have to say. I'm going to turn this over to you to best describe your work and what you're doing now. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Monica. I really have tremendous respect for all of you for doing this outstanding work. It seems I've been in this place before. Just by way of background, everybody, I'm a neuroscientist trained in neurophysiology, developmental neurophysiology, and I studied children's brains for many, many years. I was at the National Institutes of Health down the road there in Bethesda for many years. And within that context, what I saw with respect to children and their development starting in 1991 was that we were losing so many children, both emotionally, academically, and behaviorally, primarily because many of these children could not read. And not being an educator, that shocked me to some degree. I then went back and taught children to read, so I at least had some idea of the hard work that teachers have to do. But I was literally shocked that in Maryland at that time, more than 60% of youngsters from low SES schools and youngsters of color were reading below the basic level, that in the fourth grade. Now that means you can't read a simple children's book. And that was extraordinarily alarming to me. And I was asked to testify in front of Congress about that shocking statistic. And from there, we really went to work. I designed research programs at the NIH that were placed in 44 sites around the country. We studied 27,000 children, both good readers and kids having difficulty. We studied them for at least 5 years. So these were longitudinal studies, meaning we began to see the kids in kindergarten and followed them every year for at least 5 years, and a minimum 5 years, and on the average 9 years. Some of those kids are now adults and are still with us. So many of these children could not read, and because the prevalence of reading failure was so large, I asked 4 questions. I asked all of our scientists to answer 4 questions. What does it take to learn to read? What are the skills and the abilities and the instructional tactics and methods and programs to help kids read? What's the neurobiology of reading? What does the brain have to do in order to read fluently with comprehension? What are the genetics that may be involved? And what are the environmental constraints that may hinder kids and families from supporting reading? So how do kids learn to read? Second question was, why in the world are so many kids having difficulties learning to read? What were the instructional strategies that were not working? Were there neurobiological and genetic factors? And the third question, very important to Teresa for all of these years, was this: for which children are which instructional methods, programs, strategies most beneficial for which kids in which classrooms with what severity of reading difficulty? So what I can tell you is that by 1996, we had what I would say is most of the answers that people talk about today. In fact, Congress had me come back every year to testify about what we were finding. What we found was that, number one, reading is a complex skill. A lot of us who came to reading fairly easily don't realize that for many, many human beings, this is a multivariate skill and it's kind of tough. The reason it's tough is because you have to learn multiple skills and weave them together. I won't go over these in detail because I'll bore you to death, but in order to read, a kid has got to be able to understand the sound structure coming by their ear. And when I say the word big, for example, we have to have kids understand that big is composed of three sounds. The brain does that. And the reason why that's important is the BIG sounds are laid on top of the print. That is what is called phonics. Now, years ago, for some reason, people would compete against one another, phonics methods against whole language methods. And that was one of the dumbest things I ever saw, because there is no way that anybody can learn to read just by learning phonics. Because when you're reading, you not only have to apply the sound to the print when you come across words that you don't know, but you have to do it very rapidly. Otherwise, you'll bog down and forget what the heck you're reading. You also have to have developed a fairly robust vocabulary so that as we're reading, we're relating what's on the page to words that we know. And we also have to have background knowledge about the content we're reading. I could sit here and read astrophysics to you guys all day long, but I would not have the vocabulary or the background knowledge to comprehend anything I was reading. So in order to learn to read, you have to have sound structure. You have to be able to apply that sound to letters and letter patterns. That's called phonics. You have to be able to do that fluently and automatically, very rapidly. You have to be able to have the vocabulary to understand what you're reading. And you have to be able to structure your reading so that it's organized and you're being active with the text. So again, what we were up against was an educational establishment at that time, and unfortunately it's still in place now, that continued to argue about how you teach children to learn how to read from these dichotomous perspectives. Some people said you've got to teach them phonics. Some people said phonics is harmful and you don't want to do that. You just want to expose them to the print. Both of those extremes are incorrect. They're wrong, and they've left so many kids in the wake of a great deal of failure. Phonics is important, absolutely essential, but it is not sufficient. You have to have the sound structure, you have to have the speed, you have to have the vocabulary, you have to have the text reading capability. So here we are, and when Teresa asked me to come and speak, it was deja vu in the sense that I'm talking right now the same way I would present to Congress, the same way that I would advise our presidents. I was an advisor to both President Clinton and to President Bush, and they were both interested in education, and I would take them through just what I'm talking with you all about now. We do know how reading develops. We do know what goes wrong when kids don't develop appropriately or properly. We do know which instructional formats are most beneficial. And by 2003, we also had learned to identify early kids who were at risk for reading failure so we could intervene early. So this information has been in the public before Congress, before two presidents, before numerous superintendents of schools. I remember Maryland's superintendent, I believe it was Nancy Grasmick, And she was basically the only person that ever understood what she had to do. That was one brilliant lady. She knew science pretty well too. But most educators in public schools have not had the time to really immerse themselves, apparently, in understanding what it takes to learn to read, what goes wrong when it doesn't work well, and what you do about it. The fact is that information is readily available, and such that I used to advise President Bush that the nation was in the throes of continuing to apply educational malpractice. And the definition of malpractice is having the information to know how to treat in a very beneficial way and ignoring that information. And I still see in this country that we're still in the throes of these debates that do nothing for the kids. And just one very critical thing. Because we followed children for a minimum of 5 years, many of them for 20, 22 years, we found that if you don't learn to read, you don't make it in life. We saw how not being able to read led to poor health care. We saw how not being able to read minimized choices that individuals had, and they would frequently have to make a living through illegal means. We saw the shame that would occur across the board in all youngsters, no matter what socioeconomic level, no matter what color. The shame that comes along with not being able to do something in your school classroom that you see a lot of other kids being able to do. And comparing yourself with readers when you in fact don't do as skillfully as you would want the most basic fundamental academic skill. If you don't learn to read, you don't make it in life. If you don't learn to read, you're not going to be able to succeed in school. If you don't learn to read, you're not going to be able to read a prescription. If you don't read, you're not going to be able to get worthwhile employment. And you'll probably end up in trouble with the law, as many of our kids do, as they grow into adolescents and adults. And what I saw over all of those years that I was engaged at the NIH, I saw so many parents being blamed for their youngsters' behavioral difficulties and their youngsters' lack of what they would say is motivation and so forth. These kids were not behavioral problems initially. These kids were highly motivated initially. But when they did not learn to read, with reading being the most important skill they needed to inculcate while they were in classrooms, again, what are you going to do if you cannot do the most basic job that you watch other children able to do, some with ease? But I heard the statistics that Teresa was talking about, and those statistics haven't really changed. What you're looking at in Frederick is about half your kids can't read proficiently, and most likely will not be able to enjoy a life of happiness and so forth and so on. So, I mean, when I testified in front of Congress, I said, reading failure is not only an educational problem, reading failure is a public health problem. And the horrible thing about it is we know what to do. We know why reading failure occurs. We know the types of instruction that are absolutely essential to be able to help kids who struggle initially become proficient readers. Instruction must be direct, systematic. It has to be highly engaging. The teachers have to know what they are doing. A lot of times our teachers are not provided the skills they need to impart reading fundamentals to kids because it's a lot more complex than people think. And you just can't put reading material in front of kids and expect they'll garner interest and they'll be able to read fluently after a while. You know, one of the theories that set the reading field back for many years was the idea that reading was natural, that all you had to do is expose children to rich, authentic literature. And while doing that, stay away from helping them decipher the code or utilize phonics as part of the comprehensive program. Instead, as children were reading, they were taught to guess at words using the surrounding text to figure out what word might go there when they couldn't read the particular word in the text. They were asked to look at picture cues and to use those cues to predict the unknown words. They were asked to, again, ask themselves questions about how best to guess at words that they could not read. This set the kids back years and years because reading is not natural. The reader has to engage with the text in a very direct and very intentional way. You and I in this room are good readers. When we read every word on the page. Now, you're not going to think you do, but our studies have shown us clearly time after time that we don't scan the text, we read every word. And if you're reading and you don't have the skills necessary to decipher the print, then we're in trouble. So let me end with this introduction. It does not have to be this way. We now have the information, actually have had the information for 30 years about preventing reading failure and helping children learn to read who have failed in the past. We know how to do that. We've had our clinical trials underway where we do studies with reading instruction, just like we would do with pharmaceuticals. We randomly assign children to different types of teaching methods. Some of those methods work, some of them don't work. The problem is the ones that work have not been in favor among the educational community. And hopefully that will change, and hopefully the film you'll see this evening will bear out some of the facts that I've just alluded to.